Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Contact and NNPCF webinar. Today we're talking to you about integrated care systems and the new health white paper that's in circulation at the moment. The session will probably last about an hour. We've got a lot of participants today, a lot of interest in this. So we will try and keep it to the hour, but if we do have some questions, lots and lots of questions, we might extend it a little bit. So you should be able to see this introductory slide now. The session is being recorded, so if you don't want your don't want to appear whether by design or by mistake on any on the recording, you can turn your camera off. And this is where we see lots of people disappear from the screens. We will be enabling the chat function for questions. So please, if you have questions, put them into the chat. We won't take questions until we get to the end, if that's okay, because there is a lot to cover, and we will be posing some questions to you as we go. So it's quite possible that some of the questions you ask might be answered as we go as well. Please stay on mute. Unless we invite you to come off mute to ask a question, because with up to 100 people plus on this session, it's quite difficult to marshal unless we all follow those disciplines. So thank you for all that preamble. We've still got a few people coming in at the moment, but we'll start anyway because we've got a lot to get through. So welcome everybody. This is a joint NNPCF and Contact webinar on the new NHS white paper. And specifically, we're going to talk about what this means for SEND and parent carer forums, really drill into that. So my name is Marina Sasodia. I'm one of the co-chairs of the NNPCF, and I'll be taking you through this. And I'm joined by...
Hi, my name is Amanda Elliott. I'm the Strategic Health Lead for Contact, so I'll be helping Maruna with the presentation.
As I said, right up front, it's worth saying this is a really complicated area. It's there's lots and lots of technical terms. There's lots and lots of moving parts. It is still changing a lot, and there's lots and lots of open questions at the minute. And we're not going to patronize you. We're going to give it to you straight. And we're going to, we know that the people on this call, parent carer forums, you're all actually incredibly capable people. So we're not going to try and dumb it down for you in any way, shape or form. This is difficult. It is complicated. It is changing. And part of that complexity, part of that changing nature of what's happening is what you need to be aware of. Because unless you know that things are up in the air and what's happening, you're going to find it more difficult to engage. So please bear with us, and we make no apologies for the fact that this is going to be quite an involved session, but we're doing it advisedly. And without any further ado, we're also going to do something really stupid today, which is try and be a little bit interactive and use Mentimeter. For those of you who haven't used it before, this is a way of us gauging what your experience has been and what your knowledge is, and it's an interactive tool. So please, could you all go to Menti right now, and we're going to start off with a poll. So if you go to menti.com, stick in that code there, that 8-digit code there, and then answer the question that you see. So this is where our first attempt our first opportunity to cock this up right royally. As I switch screens. So you should now be able to see a Menti screen. Okay, so the question is, I know what I need to know about. Firstly, integrated care systems. Secondly, what they mean for children and young people with SEND. And thirdly, what they mean for parent carer forums. So please take a few minutes. We'll give you guys a few minutes just to rack up your answers to these questions here. Oh yeah, I see they're coming in. I've got 17 responses already. Brilliant. We'll give that a few more because that's really what the heart of what we're going to talk about today is, do you, as leaders of parent care reforms, members of parent care reforms, know what you need to know about integrated care systems, what it means to children and young people with SEND, and what it means to parent care forums? So, okay, I'm gonna, the results are still coming in. I'm gonna see if we get up to 50 responses, then I'll move on. No, we seem to be stuck at about 45. I'm sure a few more will come through in a moment. 47, there we go. So basically, we're getting pretty low scores here. Pretty low scores here. So we're saying you think you have a score out of 5. People are saying they've got 2 out of 5 for knowing what they need to know about integrated care systems, 1.9 about what it means for children and young people with SEND, and 1.8 what it means for parent care forums. So those are all pretty low scores. Now that suggests to me that this is a reasonably well targeted webinar then. So it's timely and we're picking a good subject. Right, let's see if we can fix that a little bit. Let's see if we can improve those scores. And right, this is what we're going to go through today. Firstly, we're going to go through what the documents and definitions are. Where does all this come from? Where can you find the technical details if you want it? Next, we're going to give you a little bit, a couple of sections on where we are now and what is changing. So what is the current situation? What's the history of what we've got at the moment? And how does the health service currently work? Because you need to understand that context if you're going to understand what ICSs are and what they mean for us. And then we're going to talk to you about what is changing. What's happening in the world of ICSs. As I said earlier, there are a lot of open questions. And we're going to tell you what those open questions are. What is yet to be defined? What is yet to be determined? And you need to be aware of these because these will have an impact on the work that we do. And then we're really going to drill into what this means for SEND and what this means for parent care forums. So there's a brief overview of what we're going to go through. So next up, let's go back to Menti again. And please, you should, if I go back to Menti here, and what I should be able to do is move on to the next slide. Do you know which other parent care forums are in your ICS? Results are coming in there, and a reasonably mixed bag, sort of 2/3, 1/3 maybe, saying no and yes. Right, that's going to be one of the key questions for us going through this presentation. We'll come back to that one later. Right, documents and definitions. There are 3 key documents here that are going to tell us about what the long-term plan is and how it's being implemented. The first is the long-term plan itself. You see that one on the left, and hopefully all of you have had sight of that document. If not, if you Google NHS long-term plan, it'll come up with it. There are then 2 other documents. There's one that was published in November last year, which is called NHS England Integrating Care, the next steps to building strong and effective integrated care systems across England. And then next up, there's something which is the called Integration and Innovation, working together to improve health and social care for all, which is essentially the white paper. Now, the NHS long-term plan, the document on the left-hand side of your screen, tells you what is going to be happening. So this is the substance of what is in the NHS, what is changing to the NHS. So this is where things like the learning disability and autism work is, where the children and children's mental health work is. The next 2 documents, these 2 documents, the ones on the right, tell us how things are going to change. to what is going to be happening to the governance, to the structures, to the funding, to the commissioning in the NHS. And it's really on those two documents there on the right-hand side, the one from November 2020 and February 21, that we're going to be focusing today.
Hi, yeah. Some of you will know some of these definitions already, but some of them, it's worth going through what some of the language is in that's happening. So first of all, what we have at the moment is a white paper, and for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a government proposal for change for introducing legislation, a new law, and as it will turn into a bill which will be presented to Parliament, and then once Parliament has dealt with it, it will turn into an act. So elements might change during the parliamentary process, but that's unlikely with a large government majority. And then after it becomes an act, it becomes law and receives royal assent, and then that is the law that it will follow. CCGs, I think lots of us are very familiar with these. They've been around since 2012. Clinical commissioning groups who commission hospital and community NHS services in local areas. These are the body that you've probably had most of your relationships with till now. At their peak, there were 200. There are now many fewer. And in theory, by end of 2022, and once this legislation is in place, they won't exist anymore in a legal form anyway. So what you know now will be disappearing. Many have already merged. You've probably felt the experience there. Generally, commissioning involves deciding what services are needed in a local area for the diverse local populations and making sure those services are provided. Sustainability and transformation partnerships, STPs. This is probably the first time you heard about the coming changes. In 2016, NHS organisations, local councils started getting together around England to draft proposals to improve health and care. A lot of people from different parts of the system in local areas came together and they drew up proposals, and they did have a sort of conversation with staff, patients and others. It wasn't quite a consultation, but it was that they did pick up views about what was needed. And then finally, the term that you're all going to be hearing a lot about now is the ICS, Integrated Care Systems. And these will be the new partnerships between organisations that meet health and care needs across any area, and they will coordinate services. And their main driver will be improving population health. So that's largely reducing health inequalities between different groups. They don't have a legal footing at the moment. Once the white paper becomes law, they will be legal entities in their own right, and the CCGs will cease to be legal bodies. So that's roughly around that. Could we, yeah. The system, if you hear being referred to the system, it's the same as an ICS or an STP. Place is slightly more harder to grapple with. It will be usually based on a local authority boundary, unless there are other good reasons for not to have that definition. And this is some of the source of some of the early teething problems they're having around agreeing these with local authorities and the NHS. PCNs, primary care networks, they're already starting to be set up. That will be the primary care leadership. So that's largely GPs, but others like pharmacists, and how that's expressed at a very local level. For example, where we are, they've based it on clusters of GPs, and that's an emerging system as well. And a lot of your very local stuff will be agreed and funded there. And then finally, the provider collaboratives. So all NHS trusts and foundation trusts, so that's hospitals, mental health trusts, and I guess providers of community services, are being forced to collaborate and work more collaboratively together in provider collaboratives. What those will look like, the idea is to end the competition that was brought in 2012, and those might have different shapes. They'll either be up or sideways, for example, with acute hospitals or mental health services. So again, they're emerging at the moment.
So thank you, Amanda. Just that's always setting some of the context, some of the groundwork. So we will be using words like place and PCN and system throughout this presentation. It's really important that you know precisely what they are. And also not only in this presentation, but when you go and deal with health and local authority colleagues, they will be using those terms. So where are we now? And Amanda's going to give you a little brief run through of the last sort of 10 years of the health service or so, to explain kind of why and how we've ended up quite where we've ended up.
So yeah, here's a brief spin round the relevant history of recent NHS changes. Before I go through these, it's worth mentioning that for again, those of you who've been around long enough, that a lot of these changes are about unpicking laws and legislations that were introduced under Lansley in 2012, which was the aim was to increase marketisation, so make it more of a competitive market in healthcare and increase patient choice. Largely among all the key people who know, it's kind of considered it hasn't worked because I think they've realised, particularly with the British public, those aren't the drivers in the NHS. So all this is an piece of unpicking, but also an piece of innovation. So in 2014, they, some of you will be aware of the NHS five-year forward view, which set out a roadmap. In 2015, some areas began in Vanguard sort of experimenting and testing new models of care, which you may also have heard of, mainly focused on integrating health and care for older people, but not exclusively. And then in 2016, some local councils started to come together and work as part of STPs, or Sustainability and Transformation Partnerships. Again, this wasn't a legal entity. Everybody still had their legal responsibilities below them, but they were just getting used to working together. And the STPs covered all of England. This was being imposed from the top, from NHS England, and they were being forced to consider local health and care priorities and plan together. So some areas you'll feel this happening already, and that those sort of bureaucratic structures exist at the moment, even though they don't have a legal footing. 2017, these were initial proposals were refined, and they started talking to their communities a bit more to try and fine tune those. Could I have the next slide? 2018, some more partnerships started taking on more responsibility and becoming more integrated. For example, meetings in common between CCGs. And then critically in 2019, the long-term plan was published, and stating that every area was going to be served by an ICS, or an integrated care system, and with primary and community services funded to do more. So keeping a lot of care and activity out of acute hospitals was the aspiration. But this was the critical moment when they actually, from a policy point of view, took a huge step away from an internal market and competitive. So that was a key moment with the public. So long-term plan, really important. In 2020, during COVID, NHS England set out how the systems would evolve and collaborate, and sort of gave some more detail about how they work. But bear in mind, all this is still, they haven't fine-tuned, they've got a broad idea, but some of the detail they're still thrashing out. So we can't give you an absolute template for how they work in local areas. And in 2021, the NHS England responded to the integrated care system consultation and brought forward the legislative proposal. So that's the most mature we are with those. And I think someone's asked in the chat about when this will become law. Their aspiration is spring next year, but there's many a slip between cup and lip. So, and obviously COVID is a factor. So that's their aim.
Yeah, so onto that one now. It was this, this bill was included in the Queen's speech last week, so we know that it's in this current year's this current Parliament's legislative programme, and the aspiration I heard, I think yesterday even, was that it will get royal assent in March 22. So that's when it should all happen.
Yeah, I think it's just that's our aim for being up to speed with as much as possible by then. I'll just add, yeah.
So earlier I'd asked you, do you know which other parent care reforms are in your ICS? And these are the results that we've ended up with. So less than half of you know which other parent care reforms are within your ICS. So a 36 to 27 no to yes split. Well, we're hopefully going to try and give you a little bit more of an answer on that now. So if I just flip over to the next slide here now, that is the map. Amanda, do you want to talk to it?
Yes, so this map is a map of the regions, the NHS regions that are going to be funneling the vast majority of NHS activity spend through to the ICS that sit below them. This isn't finalised, this is probably it, but this should give you some guide to how the ICS will be formulated. Bear in mind, there will be local authority collaboration in each of these areas under each region. There's also, at the end, there's some resources which will direct you some great information on the King's Fund site about ICS. And they've got a map that you can click on for your area so you can see, and they update regularly if there's any changes to this. So this is what we know at the moment, and this might be useful for you trying to work out who you're going to, in terms of parent care reforms, you may wish to sort of refresh and build up your relationships with neighbouring PCF.
Yeah, and just some additional colour for me. Firstly, to say very helpfully, NHS England has chosen to have 7 regions as opposed to the 9 that the Department for Education and local government has. So the regions do not map across exactly to what we have in the parent care reform world. The second thing to say, this the breakdown here is by CCG grouping, not by local authority grouping. And as we all know, CCG groupings do not map onto local authority groupings perfectly as well. So we can tell you which CCGs are planned to be in which ICSs, but you'll have to go and do your own digging to find out where your local authority sits within that CCG map. So we're trying to help you as much as you can, but you'll have to go do a little bit of research by yourself if you don't know already. Okay, so what is changing? Let's now talk about, we've given you a bit of a picture of where we are at the minute. So what is going to be different over the really from over the coming year, because plans are starting to be formulated now, and then certainly from March next year when the law changes. So what does the white paper say? What are its objectives and aims? And I will just, as a general rule, we try not to read out slides, but this is important enough that I will actually read this text out. First, by removing the barriers that stop the system from being truly integrated, we want to help integrated care systems play a greater role delivering the best possible care with different parts of the NHS joining it better, and the NHS and local governments forming dynamic partnerships to address some of society's most complex health needs. So there's a lot of ideas in there, in that statement. So they're talking about integration both across the NHS and between the NHS and local government here. And there's 4 themes that they keep talking about in the white paper: working together to integrate care, reducing bureaucracy, improving accountability and increasing public confidence. And then, frankly, there's a bit of a catch-all bucket for various bits and pieces of health-based legislation they've thrown into the white paper, which they're terming additional measures. We won't spend very much time at all on those additional measures, if they are literally just stuff that they've thrown in they've thrown in around health services that they need laws for. So, integrated care systems. As we said, they're set up across England. They've got to be set up by April 21. So that's then formed, not legally constituted, but formed. And the ICS footprint will bring together multiple CCGs, as we've said. And there's going to be, as I said, 2 forms of integration. This is really important. Integration within the NHS, between different NHS organisations, and integration between the NHS and local government and wider partners. So what we're trying to do through this presentation is, as I said, there's a lot of meat here, there's a lot of content here. And sometimes you'll see these little yellow stickies pop up. Every time you see one of these yellow stickies pop up, what we're doing is highlighting something that we think is important either for SEND or for parent carer forums. So here, the point here is, because we're merging local areas with many parent carer forums here, make sure you know who your partners are, who your parent carer forum partners are here. And what we'll try and do with these yellow stickies, we'll pop them up as they come up in the as we're going through, but we'll also summarize them for you at the end. So don't feel as if you have to scroll everything down as you go. Right. Governance. How will the ICSs work? Well, there are two boards. Really confusingly, there are going to be two boards for each ICS. The first is called the ICS body. And the ICS body is really the one that is the real decision-making group, where the money and decision-making is going to sit with the ICS body. The NHS money comes through the ICS body. It'll have a chair, it'll have a chief executive, it'll have reps from all of the NHS trusts in the area, GPs and local authorities. That's the core body. Then there's going to be a second board, which is called an ICS Health and Care Partnership. And this is going to be a wider community-based board, which will bring together many more players from the local area, including the voluntary sector, social care providers, maybe even private sector providers, and Health Watch. So look out for these two boards. Now, it is very unlikely that parent care forums will get a place on the ICS body, almost certainly will not. However, I think it's really recommended that you try and figure out how you can get some influence into the ICS Health and Care Partnership. Things to draw out here: no patient or public voice on the ICS boards. And the next point here to bear in mind, can you get yourself some sort of representation on the ICS Health and Care Partnership? And bear in mind, this might not be you as an individual ICS, as an individual PCF. You might have to band together with your other local PCFs. You might have to form some sort of alliance with Health Watch. But this is the opportunity. This is where we might get some parent voices heard. But how that will happen, we don't know yet. But that's something for you to have local conversations about. Right. Amanda mentioned earlier this idea of place. ICSs will cover many places, but they have not defined what place is. They're leaving that up to local ICSs to decide. What does place mean in your system? It could be a local authority. So, for example, my local ICS, my ICS, has made a conscious decision that place is going to be local authority. So the 4 local authorities covered by my ICS will all be a place. Some ICSs are talking about CCGs being place. And it could also be something else. There are discussions about other things happening as well. The idea is that a lot of powers, particularly those of accountability and co-production, will be delegated to place. We expect a lot of the co-production and community engagement to happen at place, which seems to be the steer. So it's really important you have a good understanding of what your place means. ICSs are also going to be required to look at things like joint strategic needs assessments and joint health and wellbeing strategies. And these are all happening at a local authority level. So again, place becomes really important. And again, there's a bit of a mix-up here when it comes to accountability. NHS services are going to be held to account by NHS England and up into government and parliament. And local authorities have accountability up through their elected representatives and down to the local electors. So this idea of what place means in each local area is going to be really important. So to summarize, there is some disagreement about what place actually is. If it's not going to be a local authority footprint in your local area, then it's not going to match your parent carer forum footprint. And that's something you're going to have to figure out with your local partners in parent carer forums. And lastly, joint strategic needs assessments are going to be really important because the ICSs are required to have regard for them. So make sure your JSNA is up to scratch. And there's going to be lots and lots of plans. Lots and lots of plans operating at lots and lots of different levels. There is complexity in this system, possibly too much complexity. And maybe some of that will get ironed out as this white paper goes through the parliamentary process, but I'm not sure much of it will. So this slide is a little bit more detail about the role of place. But the key thing is that this is where, because this is where a lot of local accountability and a lot of local responsibility will come in. I won't go through this slide. The slides will be distributed, but please take a look at this in more detail when you get the slides. So can I ask you to go to Menti again, please? It should be the same code. And if you bear with me a moment, I will go to Menti and I'll scroll forward to the next slide. So how has your ICS defined place? Is it defined as a local authority? Is it defined as a CCG? Is it defined as something else, or don't you know? I think we've got a clear winner here, haven't we? Wow, okay. That is really, really clear. They are doing an appalling job at engaging with their local communities. Okay, and by the way, this is really useful and interactive and interesting for us to look at as we go through this presentation. But we are going to be feeding these results back to NHS England. So they will know that a really clued up group of people who work nationally, who are really plugged into their local areas, who are based in co-production, the vast majority of you do not have the right engagement to know what place means in your ICS, which is the critical building block. Wow, that's really powerful information. Thank you, everybody. Right. Okay. Amanda touched on this earlier. The broad brush requirement following the 2012 land use reforms in the NHS and health was almost a competition imperative. We're doing almost a real 180 on that now. And this white paper really, really importantly, and I think helpfully for parent carer forums in our world, introduces a duty to collaborate. There is now going to be a duty to collaborate between NHS organisations and local authorities in law. Now that exists already across various places, but anything that reinforces that need to work jointly across the systems, we welcome. So some key points I bring out on this slide. Firstly, there are requirements in the legislation, the draft legislation, to encourage joint commissioning. Abilities to appoint lead commissioners and pool budgets are baked in here. There's a requirement or a chance to form joint committees to include representation from other bodies, such as PCNs, GP practices, community health providers, local authorities, and the voluntary sector. Again, this is in the draft white paper. So there's a chance here, again, a little loophole here, a little window where we might be able to get PCF representation. We might also be able to get some PCF funding through these methods as well. There's a requirement for them to do this, and that would probably mean for me a requirement that they should fund it as well. There's a requirement now that the requirements for competitive commissioning falls back a little bit, and they're allowed to use processes. The language they use is processes to arrange services, so they can basically make sensible decisions about if there are people who are already working together, for example, in the mental health space, charities, private companies, they can actually bring them together and just say, actually, you do this bit, you do that bit. And PCS should be involved in that shaping of local services. So look out for that. And lastly, there's a really important thing here around sharing of data. There's more abilities to share data across the system. So again, when you get barriers put in your way, sort of saying, where the local centre team saying they can't share data with the local health teams or vice versa, actually some of those barriers are being removed. Again, can I pick your brains here with another Menti poll here? So the next one is, if I can move forward. How good is your joint strategic needs assessment when it comes to SEND? How good is your JSNA when it comes to SEND? Potential answers are, we don't have one. It's part of a bigger JSNA. We've got one, but it's not very good. And we've got one and it's great. Okay. Wow, again, getting some really, really clear results there, aren't we? Only 5 out of 56 of you have said, we've got a good JSNA. We've got a good JSNA for children with SEND. This might be something you want to focus on, because the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment will be looked at in a way, takes on much, much greater importance going forward than it has had previously, because it will form the basis of joint working and joint commissioning across both your ICS for the health provider bits and also into the work that's being done with the local authorities. So this maybe tells me that with contact, we might need to do a little bit of work on what should be, what should we be looking for at a good JSNA for children and young people with SEND, and how might you, as PCS, influence it? Really, really clear messages again there. Thank you. And this is what you're giving us here is really powerful data and information to take back to the NHS. Right. Flipping back to the PowerPoint. So there's a triple aim here underlying, what is the purpose? Why is all this being done? The triple aim for health bodies, triple duty, is better health care, health and well-being for everyone, better quality of health services for all individuals, and sustainable use of NHS resources. There's also something in here around patient choice. So under the new model, bodies that arrange NHS services as a decision-making body will be required to protect, promote, and facilitate patient choice in respect to services or treatment. So a couple of really big learnings from these things for you to frame your conversations in. Firstly, the triple aim does include children, and it does include children with SEND. And you need to make sure that children with SEND are not forgotten when your ICS is talking about these things, because we are included. You also probably want to think a little bit about how your priorities locally fit into these three aims, the triple aim. Because again, if you can relate what you're doing and what you need to do locally for children with SEND into this language, it's going to land much better. You've got to talk their language to them. So think about how you can use this language to frame what you need from your local health and local authority bodies. And again, this is a little bit unclear. Does choice mean person-centered? They're using different language. They're using different language. And we just need to go and make that connection for them that, you know, actually, the Children and Families Act talks a lot about person-centered services, and choice should be person-centered. Again, I'm going to ask you to do another poll here. So go to Menti again, same code. Seem to be getting the hang of this now, which is great. So I'm going to scroll forward to the next poll. Are children with SEND included in your ICS priorities? Yes, no, or don't know. Again, we've got a clear winner there. Don't know. But actually, what's encouraging there for me is that we've got far more yeses than nos, which is great, because they should be. They should be. Children with SEND are a major part of the long-term plan, and there's a huge focus particularly on the learning disability and autism cohort, and also in children's mental health at the moment as part of the long-term plan. So your ICS should be talking about children, and it should be talking about children with SEND as defined by the SEND Code of Practice. Over the coming weeks and months, there will be more engagement from the ICSs, and if you don't know, if you're one of the 54 that put don't know there, go and ask your local CCG the question. What are the ICS priorities? How do we influence them? Can we make sure that children with SEND are included? Again, this is brilliant data information for us, for our conversations with health providers and health commissioners nationally. Okay, I'll scoot through these slides because there's less on these for parent care reform. So there is talk about enhancing public confidence and accountability. There's a lot of mention here around adult social care in the white paper and the accountability and what accountability for adult social care looks like. There is no mention at all of children's social care. Again, this might be a conversation you want to go and have locally about what they're planning to do around children's accountability, children's services and children's social care. And then I also, if you remember at the beginning, I also said there's a whole bucket of stuff they threw into this, whole bunch of stuff they threw into this bucket. So there are sections on obesity, fluoridation, international reciprocity, national tariffs, all sorts of various technical bits and pieces, which I'm not proposing to take you through. If you are interested, go look at the white paper.
Okay, so I've had some reflection on this, and this isn't set in stone, but I think that it's a mixed bag, like most reforms. And I think there are opportunities for PCF and for improving the lot of children and families, children with SEN. However, there are also risks. So let's be positive and start with the opportunities. There's going to be a new system, probably with lots of new leaders. And I guess it's a fresh chance for forums to forge new relationships and do things differently to make an impact for our kids. The other real positive, this is the first time integrated care, which we all know how important that is for many of our children, and collaboration are actually going to be baked into NHS commissioning. It's not just an aspiration. They're absolutely going to be under pressure to do that. So is that an opportunity for better joint commissioning for SEN? We know that's really weak area and has been ever since the reforms. One of the other greats about this is hopefully there's going to be an end to wasteful, time-consuming, competitive transactional commissioning. So if you think a lot of the commissioning process, there's a lot of people who just work on paying different bits of the system. So hopefully, in theory, that should mean more money for improving care, which is one of their aspirations. There's also a focus on health outcomes. That's the impact of any health or integrated health and care intervention. So does it make a difference to the person at the other end, rather than how many episodes of care they've delivered? So that's really positive. The other great thing, and this has been amplified by the COVID crisis, there's going to be a massive focus on health inequalities and between different groups. And we know that our families and their children really experience massive health inequalities. So, you know, these are words, if you're going to be talking to your new systems or your local authority, make sure health inequalities is right up there, particularly if you're trying to persuade and influence. And obviously mental health is going to be a key priority, along with other sort of more widespread issues like obesity and diabetes. So that's another big in for our forums, if you like. So now to the risks. This is without a doubt a top-down organisation of the NHS. And one of the consequences of that is that the centres of power, the people that control the money, are shifting up, not down. So the people who ultimately make the decisions about where resources go are going up to the system, which covers the equivalent of several CCGs at the moment, rather than staying locally with the CCG. And that, in theory, can make it harder to influence how that money is going to be spent in health in your area. Or it will be a more complicated, potentially more complicated process. The great thing about, you know, tackling health inequalities, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. However, the way they do that is focusing on population health. So hence the really important role of the joint strategic needs assessments. But they'll be looking at population and be measured on improving population health across the ICS, not just your local authority area or your current CCG. So it will be a large area that they'll be measured on. And whether we like it or not, the biggest public health issues in the country are issues like obesity and heart disease, and the biggest killers. So a lot of the focus and a lot of the driver of this is the prevalence of chronic illness health in adults, which they see as you know, costly and not resolved. So the problem there is that it may well crowd out issues important to our families with children. And I think that's something to bear in mind when you're trying to get on agendas. So, and I think the key to that is going back to health inequalities. Our children suffer terrible health inequalities because of their disability. There's also poverty, there's also et cetera, mental health. Unfortunately, well, no, not unfortunately, one of the problems is where they do include priorities for children, it's children in the broader sense. And where a lot of, because there's a public health driver behind it, a lot of the focus will be really on, I mean, really early years, the first 1,001 days, which is prior to birth. So that's supporting pregnant mums, making sure they have access to good maternity services. There is the key document for this is the Best Start of Life 1001 Critical Days report, which some of you might be familiar with, because there is a proposed that they want PCF involved with that, but the focus is very, very early years. There are things about disabled children needing particular focus and pathways, but you know, that's where a lot of these areas are going to be focusing, because I think they can make the biggest impact for the largest number. Again, the problem with that is our disabled children, you know, it's lifelong, and therefore they need often more bespoke approaches and specialist approaches. On a broader scale, expect changes to the configuration of hospitals and services in your footprint area. So what you might see, and that's really happening in some areas, there's your traditional district general hospital that does everything plus an A&E, may well be turned into a centre of excellence with maybe not a full-time A&E, with maybe you know, a specialism in doing operations, you know, elective care, so planned operations. You may see the downgrade and closure of some A&Es, or them going further away. This is obvious in London because they moved a lot of the paediatric A&Es during COVID. I mean, there were good reasons for that, trying to keep the kids away from the infections, but it's likely a lot of those changes. So we in London have to travel further to get the paediatric expertise. However, that might be different in the shires and the counties You may already have to travel miles to go to them anyway. So that will vary from area, but do keep an eye on what's happening to the system and where different specialists, because obviously services for disabled children, you want them on your doorstep. If you see a specialist, you don't want to be having to travel miles and miles for that as well. So obviously the Secretary of State gets more say or power over service changes. That could be a good or bad thing. They will always have one eye on voters, and they might be able to step in if there's a big hoo-ha about hospital closures, that kind of thing. One of the themes of all of this is that they want patients, that's us, I suppose, to take on more risk. So, and where you'll see that is in outpatient appointments in hospitals, is that they're experimenting with something called patient-initiated follow-up. So you might get a letter saying your next appointment is, or whatever, often late, often after the appointment, but here the onus will be falling on a lot of people to say, oh, I need a follow-up, or I don't need a follow-up. They're hoping to save quite a lot of money through that. And then the other thing which might account for some of the lack of why you may not know about what's in your ICS, what's in your place, is that some local authorities are underwhelmed by how much their power and influence over health money is likely to be diluted under this arrangement. They'll have to band together with local authorities to fight for to influence the funds for their ICS. So these are the negatives. They may not come to pass. It all might come out beautifully and we'll be in a new Eden, but just bear in mind some of those. I think what really impressed me was the health influencing group recently, which is, I think, led by the CDC and the National Children's Bureau, wrote a letter to the Secretary of State about the Health and Social Care Bill as being very little on children and children's social care. There's nothing in it, because the focus is on adults with chronic ill health. And I think that behind the scenes, there's a lot going on about getting them up the agenda, and that will help you at the local level. But it is something you'll have to fight for locally as well. And I think health inequalities is one of your key weapons for doing that. Sorry, I'm using the language of combat, which is alien to co-production. Anyway, that's me. Thank you.
And then just to say, Amanda, thanks for that reference to the letter, just to share that both Contact, as a member of the Disabled Children's Partnership, and NNPCF as an independent organisation, put our names to that letter. So I think you'll find a link to it through our social media and on the website as well. So I promised you we've been through a lot today, okay? So what I'm going to try and do now in the next 3 sections is just give you some checklists. Just try and bring it all together for you in 3 slides of what the key things you probably want to take away are. And as I said, we're not going to mollycoddle you in any way. Let's start with the open questions. What has not yet been decided? So the white paper is very light on individual co-production. We need to keep reminding people of what the NHS Constitution says around the requirements to build services around patients. The paper hardly mentions strategic co-production at all. And can we use bodies like Health Watch, Health and Wellbeing Boards, and local government to gain purchase? And by the way, we're not the only ones saying this. The local government are really, really worried about this, in the sense that they are saying, if you don't define place as being a local authority area, where's the link to the electors? Where's the link? Where's the link to the local population and that accountability? The big one that we can't get away from in the middle: what is place? What does it mean for you, in your area? The relationship between the NHS body and the ICS Health and Care Partnership, if you remember those 2 boards I described earlier on, is very unclear. You probably want to make sure that you're getting the right sort of influence on the Health and Care Partnership. Despite ICSs being required to cover social care as well, there's very little detail about social care in this white paper. And let's be honest, we all know this from our experiences with the implementation of the Children and Families Act. It's all very well putting a legislative veneer over a broken system, Things won't change if the culture's not right. People really don't want to come together. What does this mean for SEND? So again, a little checklist for you here of things you might want to look at. So is your local SEND JSNA up to scratch? Does it properly describe the needs of children and the priorities that a local area should have when it comes to our kids? What other new joint committees are being set up in your local area for commissioning or for monitoring? Can they be used to drive joint commissioning? Can PCS get a role on those? And don't forget, education should be a part of those as well. Can you describe how your local SEND objectives of the Parent Carer Forum fit into the AAA? Are children included in your local ICS priorities? Make sure they are. How can local data sharing improve connectivity and services to children with SEND? And how can providers be better arranged to meet the needs of children with SEND and their families? And that word arrange is in inverted commas for a reason, because that's the language they use in the bill. If they can be arranging services, please go and talk about how you might better arrange services locally to meet the needs of our children. The last bit I'm going to take you through is what this means for Parent Carer Forums, a checklist here. So, firstly, ensure you work with your neighbouring PCS to cover the ICS footprint. Form an alliance with your local PCS. Don't try and do it alone, you won't be successful. Make sure you know how place is being defined locally. Go ask that question. Make sure you know what subcommittees are being set up in your place and which you should be represented on. Build and renew relationships with existing bodies, including Health Watch and Health and Wellbeing boards. Make sure you've got those connections with Health Watch and Health and Wellbeing boards, because they are, again, established under legislation, and they are referred to under this legislation. So they will definitely have a role, and they will have leverage, and they can help you. Understand who's funding the local voluntary and community organisations from the new system, and make sure you get your fair share of money, because we do a lot for health services, health provision, and we do not get the money we deserve for it, the contribution we deserve for it. So make sure you understand where the money is flowing and where the local voluntary sector is being funded from, and make sure you get your piece of that. And then just keep talking to everybody about co-production, co-production, and co-production. Just remind them that it's there in the NHS Constitution, it's there in the Care Act, it's there in the Children and Families Act, and they've got to do it. So I'm going to do something a little bit risky here. I'm going to ask you to go back to Menti, and that question we asked at the beginning about how much do you know? I know what I need to know about integrated care systems, what they mean for children and young people with SEND, and what they mean for Parent Carer Forums. I'm going to ask you that same question again to see if we've managed to move the dial today. Let the results come in. Okay. That's good. That's good. I was a little worried asking this question, and might be a little bit foolish asking this question. You know what? And I was worried about two things. I was worried about the scores going down between now and when we started. So I'm pleased to see that you feel actually we have informed you a little bit better than you were. I was also a bit worried about the scores being too high. I was worried about scores coming in as 4s and 5s, because if they came in as 4s and 5s, we haven't done our job properly, because there is a lot of uncertainty, and you do not know what you need to know about ICSs, what they mean for SEND, and what they mean for Parent Carer Forums at the moment, because there is so much up in the air. So if you'd have come back with 4s and 5s, we wouldn't have done our job properly either as well. So I'm really, really happy with having moved you from being from 1.7, 1.8, which is where we started, up into the threes, because that feels like as far as we can take you at the minute. If you had come back with fours and fives, we would have been doing you a disservice and giving you a false sense of security. So that's kind of where we need you to be. So thank you. That's really, I'm personally really, really pleased about that. And I don't know, Amanda, if you want to comment on that.
Sorry, I was just interrupted by my teen then. So what was your question to comment on?
Just saying, I'm happy with the scores between being about threes and just
it was a lot to cover, and there is so many unknowns. So we wouldn't expect people to know significantly more. I think it helps us understand where we need to fill the knowledge gap and find out and support as well. So that's so helpful, and yeah, great.
And I'm just going to flip back. More information. These are all really useful links. So please go and take a look, and they give you a lot more color and a lot more detail around what we've been talking about today. And thank you today for also doing the Menti polls for us, because they've given us really, really invaluable information that we can take back to NHS leaders about what's happening, and your feedback there is invaluable. So we've got a little bit of time. I'm conscious we're at the hour. We will spend a little bit of time answering some questions. So if you can hang around, please do. But if not, we completely understand, and we're happy to take questions offline as well. So, Amanda, are there any burning questions that we feel we should address now?
There was an interesting question earlier on about why is it so difficult to agree what the definition of place, and I thought you might be good to answer that one, but it's a lot of it is to do with politics in the background and things that we're not party to. So there will be arguments going on, discussions going on between local authorities and the current CCGs and NHS chiefs, and that's why they don't use regions and boundaries that align with local authorities. I don't know the answer to that, Marina. You may.
Well, I think there's a little bit of passing the buck here, because there is very much a local agenda with this stuff, which is saying they do not want to impose structures on local areas that know themselves better than the national government does. So they don't want to be prescriptive around this stuff. And so they've kind of left it up to the local areas and systems to define what it means for them. And there is a bit of a battle going on between CCGs who want place to be CCGs, because clearly that's in their interest for it to be CCGs, and local authorities who want place to be local authorities. We have a very clear view, which is we think it should be local authority. Why? Because that's where local accountability and elected accountability really does sit. And also it's convenient for us as parent care reforms, because that's the footprint that we follow. So frankly, we think it's more accountable, more democratic, and frankly easier for us if it's parent care reforms. But sadly, Matt Hancock did not ask my view when he was framing this legislation. So we've had no influence on that at all.
There was also some really important commentary about the disabled children that fall outside the priority cohorts. I mean, if they're not learning disabled or autistic. And I mean, that's driven largely by the long-term plan. However, one of the things that will be happening as a result of these changes is the old style community services contracts that either delivered usually by hospital trusts or people like that. What we're seeing in our area is that they're kind of dissolving and being split between the primary care networks and much more regional level. And the thing that you probably need to keep an eye on what's happening to those services, because that's where the bulk of our kids' services are in terms of diagnostics, audiology, all those ongoing services. So knowing what is happening to the commissioning of those is really important. And also we haven't really touched on provider collaboratives, which is the way they're going to organise the services and the trusts that are delivering those services. And at the moment, I haven't seen a great deal about how patient and user and parent voice is going to be able to influence those. So that's one that we need to keep an eye on, because that's actually how they're delivered rather than how they're strategically commissioned. So the need to, and the other thing that worries me slightly is that if the health and wellbeing boards are the main players on those partnership boards, if you've got a great outward looking, strong, robust health watch or collection of health watch who listen to send families, that's great. If you've got a weakened structure that is not outward looking and not aware of the needs of SEND children, you've got a bit of challenge on your hand. And in those circumstances, you know, making your children's leads at local authority level your best friend, and it could be a strategy. So those are just some things to look out for. Sorry, I don't think I've answered the questions.
I think we'll leave it there. I'm mindful of time, unless there's anything burning, anything else, a burning question that we need to answer, Amanda. Apologies, I can't see the question for some reason, so I'm depending on you. But if there's anything that we come up with that we haven't been able to answer today, we'll gladly send an email out. There will be a survey sent out around this webinar. Please do take a look at it and answer all the questions. Your feedback is really important to us shaping these and getting them right going forward. We've done a couple of new things today, and hopefully they've worked. But thank you for attending. We had almost 100 people on today's, which is fantastic. And hopefully we've equipped you a little bit to go and ask some of those thorny questions and get PCFs and children with SEND onto the ICS agenda. Thank you.